All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody who's tuning in to this webinar on DACA and the process of creating systemic change in higher education. We're welcoming about 260 people via Zoom, and we have also a live Facebook live stream going. This will also be recorded and available to everyone at the end of our webinar. In order to set the tone for our time together today, if you would join me in an opening prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Creator God, we pray for DACA recipients, for their protection, their dignity, their hope, and for ourselves as allies, that we may boldly lift our voices again and again as advocates, that we may remember our own times of uncertainty and fear and authentically stand in solidarity with those for whom DACA has brought light and hope. And as those directly affected by migration and inhumane policies, we pray for our community, people of undocumented, DACA, migrant, refugee, and mixed status, for our families, our homes, and our dreams. Sustain our vision, strength, and ongoing action for justice, O God, that we may maintain hope and find light as we live our days with the constant backdrop of uncertainty. And we pray for the policymakers, all those in positions of power in our government and courts. May the United States Supreme Court, the President of the United States, and all elected and appointed officials have the wisdom to see and uphold the dignity of all people, regardless of immigration status. Amen. And thank you to the Ignatian Solidarity Network, whose prayer that is. To begin our session, Elena Segura, who is the National Director of Pastoral Migratoria, will say a few words about this ministry.
Well, thank you, Liz. It is a privilege to be in this space with each of these wonderful panelists and each person who dedicated time to be in this space. Pastoral Migratoria is an immigrant-led ministry for service, justice, and accompaniment actions in parish communities that started as a part of a failure of immigration reform in 2007. Actually, since 2005, the Catholic community has been working towards justice for immigrants. There is an office at the U.S. Conference of Bishops called the same thing, Justice for Immigrants, and one of our speakers is present here. We've been working for 15 years now for this journey. An event like this one simply encourage us to continue this long journey, no matter what. We have a God of justice that walks ahead of us. Legislative change sometimes takes decades to happen. We walk in hope. And yes, even during the journey itself, there are some flowers in the desert. During these 15 years, I have been honored to witness how these Catholic universities, who are our speakers, created systemic change to welcome and accompany undocumented students. My prayer is that these Chicago universities inspire other universities across the country to do the same. Thank you for your prophetic work and for your institution's commitment to work for justice so DACA students can reach and live their full potential in society. Thank you for inspiring me, for letting me see the flowers in the desert and renew my hope. And everybody, let's keep the journey for 15 years and counting until justice arrives. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Now we're going to hear from Sumbul Siddiqui. She is a second-year medical student at Loyola University Stritch School of Medicine, and at the same time, she's also pursuing a master's in public health with an emphasis on policy at the Parkinson School of Health Sciences and Public Health at Loyola University Chicago. She's also a DACA recipient. Sumbul?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, especially for that beautiful prayer. It's really an honor to be able to be here and share my journey as someone who has DACA status. First, I'll share a bit about my background and then my journey to medical school and my hopes and dreams for the future. We're a diverse group of people who have DACA, so I'm here to share my experiences as an individual. So a little bit about my early life. So I was born in Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia doesn't believe in birthright citizenship, so my family is actually Pakistani. And so while I'm born in Saudi, my culture for my parents is from Pakistan. And I'm the eldest of 4 children, and I come from a mixed status family. So the 2 youngest were born here in the States, and we migrated to the USA for a better life. My parents wanted us to have a better education. So I came to the state of Georgia when I was 4 years old. And it was really until my senior year of high school that I found out about my undocumented status. It was a new part of my identity that I didn't know existed. So in high school, you really just try to fit in and figure out who you are. And now identity, this invisible one. And I found out really when I started applying for colleges and trying to fill out forms, state aid. And then I learned that I was ineligible for everything because of this immigration status. So it's pretty devastating because growing up, I was told to keep good grades and that college would become affordable because I didn't want to burden my parents with finances, and they were already working so hard to provide for our family. But on top of that, I would learn later that the state of Georgia would also ban undocumented students from the top public colleges. And this was before 2011, to give you all some perspective, before DACA was even created. And I was just learning about my immigration status, and no one really knew how to guide me either. But eventually I started reaching out to private institutions, and I was accepted to Agnes Scott College, a women's college with an international scholarship. But I never really considered myself an international student. I don't have the experiences of someone from another country because I grew up here, but this was my reality. And I was just happy to go to college just like my peers. And my mom, she sold whatever she could to help us with all the other educational costs. And then traded in 2012, and I was able to get a work card and a work permit. So I was able to work Dunkin' Donuts, which I was happy because coffee is the staple. And I was a biology tutor at my college. But I started to take on more classes so that I could graduate a semester early in order to decrease those finances. And I did. Even though I worked a lot of nights, I graduated a semester early, magna cum laude with bachelor's in neuroscience. And I became the first in my family to get a college education. And I was also on the pre-med track. So this was another challenge. Like, how do I become a competitive applicant for medical school? Despite having DACA, I still couldn't apply for federal science and health related activities and research programs. I needed that experience though. So I asked my professors for help, if I could help them in their lab. It didn't really matter to me if they could pay me or not. I was really eager to learn and get that experience. I also volunteered at the hospital nearby and the free clinics on the weekends. And I think it was really these free clinics that became such a significant part of my life. As an undocumented family, we don't have access to health insurance. So it was really a struggle to find care for my parents. And then I found these free health clinics with physicians that were volunteering their time. And I was really inspired because there were so many other people out there like my family who either lacked health insurance or they were underinsured. And I wanted to, be a part of the solution and help. But unfortunately, by the time I was ready to apply to medical school, my pre-med advisor at the time told me that I had very little chance of getting accepted anywhere. Her first question to me was whether or not I was a citizen. So I was pretty devastated again, but she was right. No medical school in Georgia, especially at the time, was going to look at my application or consider me as any other applicant. And it didn't really matter that my family paid our taxes either. I tried to prove, our Georgia residency and how long I lived there. Essentially, that it really mattered. One thing, citizenship. But that night, even though I was really, really sad, I thought to myself, that there's got to be other people out there like me, right? I can't be the only one who wants to go to medical school. and who's undocumented. And I Googled and I found out about Stritch School of Medicine. And this was the only one in the nation at the time. And that's really all I needed at the time. It was hope, and it was a chance to be considered equal. So I knew I couldn't give up. You know, Loyola became my dream school. And fast forward, I'm here, of course, now at Loyola. I chose to defer my first year of medical school to pursue the MPH. So I'm in the 5-year dual degree instead of the traditional 4 years. Now, I love studying. And I'm especially interested in healthcare policy and advocacy. I've learned that policies dictate my life, and they continue to do so on what it can and can't do. So I know that they can also be changed, that we can do better, and that, you know, I believe that families deserve access to healthcare and quality healthcare, and that they shouldn't be struggling, especially not here in America. So on top of my medical degree, I'm also pursuing the MPH. So while I have DACA, I know that I'm very privileged, but the challenges still continue. You know, I'm not like I have to renew and pay for DACA every 2 years, which of course is tentative and confusing right now. And I look for private loans to help fund my medical education, and look for a citizen cosigner, which is burdensome even for them. And just think 1 year can be $80,000, and we pay a higher interest rate. So there's all this anxiety of whether DACA even stays or not, whether I'll even be able to apply for residency if they do take it away and I lose my work permit. And that fear that I get if I'm going to be deported, or that I'll lose my parents. And I can't really experience what it must be like to travel out of the country, like my peers on medical trips, or even go to the border states because of all the ICE officers. So as a medical student, I should really just be a medical student, focused on studying and training to be a good doctor. But one day I do hope I can be at a clinic, work at a clinic, where I can serve the underserved and the most vulnerable of our population. And I am grateful for everything that I have, for the sacrifices my parents have made for me to be here, for the allies that we have who support us. But I know that we as a nation can do better, especially if we believe that human beings have the right to education and healthcare, a good quality of life. And if you can't make those changes on a federal level, then maybe think about state level. And if you can't make those changes on a state level, then maybe think about community level changes. Think about what you can do in your own institutions that you can make. And remember, it's not just about equality, but also equity. And I believe the rest of our speakers will be able to share more about how you can help. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak here with you all again. Please be well and safe, everyone.
Thank you, Symbol. Thank you so much. Thanks for your hard work and your persistence, and for telling us about everything that you're doing now, and also for the challenge for people to find ways that they can be supportive of DACA and other immigrants in our society. Now we're going to move to the portion where we have the higher ed panel. By way of introduction for myself, my name is Liz Collier, and I'm a professor of business ethics at Dominican University. And I have been on the advisory council for Pastoral Migratoria for many years now. And so in my capacity, but in higher ed, I do the work that I can for the Archdiocese on immigration issues. With us today for our panelists, we have Dr. Donna Carroll, who's the president of Dominican University in River Forest. She was one of the first Catholic presidents to really come out and push for the rights of undocumented students in higher education. We have Professor Mark Kashevsky, who's the Michael I. English S.J. Professor of Medical Ethics and Director of the Neiswanger Institute for Bioethics and Health Policy at Loyola University Stritch School of Medicine. Father Memo Campuzano, who's Vice President of Mission and Ministry at DePaul University. And Ms. Ashley Feasley, who's an attorney and the Director of Policy for the Office of Migration Policy and Public Affairs at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. So I have a few questions for each of the speakers, and then Ashley's going to do a presentation. If you have questions for Sumbul or for any of the speakers, you can write them in the chat, and at the conclusion of each person's remarks, then we'll aggregate the questions into general topics, and then we'll have the panelists respond. So Donna, if I could start with you. What initially motivated you to walk more closely with Dreamers?
Thanks, Liz, and good afternoon, everybody. You know, I tell this story often. Many years ago, I was driving to campus in a snowstorm, and I saw one of our students who was pedaling to campus on a bicycle. So I pulled over, and we put his bike in my car. And as we were driving to campus, he told me a little bit about his background and his story. He explained that he was undocumented, and this was way before DACA, and that he couldn't get a driver's license. So that's where it really began for me. A week or so later, that same student showed up in my office with a few friends and an invitation to speak at a rally. And back then, there weren't many presidents that were comfortable coming forward and speaking about undocumented students. So one podium led to another, and I got hooked by the possibility that I could make a difference in the lives of these students. And I thought to myself that as Catholic educators, we could use our influence to make a big difference, and we should. So it's always been the students' stories that motivate me. That's my encounter, if that's the language we will use. You know, it's about their courage in speaking up. It's their aspirations for a better future, their justified frustration and pain sometimes, and yet their relentless determination. Today, about 10% of Dominicans' undergraduate students are undocumented. But for every student who matriculates at Dominican, there are at least 5 other qualified students that we can afford to help. And that motivates me. These are students who really are looking to belong in college, and welcoming them is an important part of our mission. So it's the initial connection with that student. It's the understanding of those student stories. And then it's the recognition that as the president of a university, in the context of our mission, we have a moral responsibility to do something to change the situation. So that's what got me hooked, Liz. And that was 15 years ago.
All right, thank you. Mark, would you explain to us, what did you do for Loyola Medical School in order to allow undocumented students to pursue their medical vocation? And if you could also just add a little bit also on how did you even get acquainted with this issue in the first place?
Thanks, Liz. As a bioethics professor, a bioethicist, I also do clinical consults over in the hospital. So when there's ethical issues that need to be sorted out, physicians or nurses can call us and we come and talk. And I had become aware of the plight of undocumented immigrants as patients who, because of difficulties with insurance and not being eligible for the social safety net, we sometimes get stuck in the hospital. They'd have an injury, not be able to be discharged to rehab or things like that. So I became something of an advocate for undocumented patients, and people got to know me about that. But sort of like Dr. Donna was saying, because I got known for that, I got an email from a professor on the West Coast in March of 2011 that described the best student he'd ever had, who had a 3.96 GPA and all these service activities and wanted to be a doctor, but had this one little problem that she was undocumented. And that was epiphany for me, because I knew about undocumented Americans, but I didn't realize that there were all these young people who were achieving to this high level who wanted to go to medical school. And in 2011 was before DACA was created. And so I started to do my homework. I wrote a report for our dean and president of the university that has become known jokingly as the report that nobody asked for, that explains all of the things that the benefits that would come from having DACA, from having undocumented students become physicians. Medicine has a diversity problem, and so that we have this pipeline of a rich, diverse group of students who are achieving, who could become physicians and treat patients and serve underserved communities that they came from. And so I essentially built the business case in this report for the benefits that they would bring, and pointed out the barriers, though, because in 2011, there was no DACA. We were going to get stuck at the point at which they were to go on to residency. But come June 15th of 2012, when DACA was created, we were ready to go, and we became the first medical school in the country to openly declare that we were accepting applications from DACA recipients, and they could compete on a level playing field. In fact, actually, for about 3 years, we cornered the market on DACA recipients. No other medical schools were not following suit, but about the third year, the dam broke, and suddenly medical schools across the country started accepting. And I think that that's where the institutional piece of this comes in, that one, I had to work the inside of the system, building the case, showing the barriers, trying to help, enlist allies among the other administrators and our dean for how these barriers could be overcome. And then the idea, though, that there had always been some undocumented people who'd gone to through higher ed and even become physicians, but as long as that was a secret, there was always going to be a very limited amount of people, limited opportunity, and limited benefits to the community. By being able to become a medical school that openly proclaimed this, we were able to then attract other medical schools after a few years to do this, and it became open, it became fair, it became more just for on a playing field level, and the benefits to medical education and medicine became bigger. And so eventually the American Association of Medical Colleges, the American Medical Association, have all become huge advocates and filed amicus briefs in the case before the Supreme Court that was recently decided favorably. And so institutional support, once you openly proclaim something, and institutional support snowballs. And that's also then played well in the media, where some of our students like Sumbul can advocate publicly and actually change the image of undocumented immigrants in the public sphere. And so all of that is just so important. And I was just the instigator at one little piece, driven by the students' parts of this, but that is so important, that this be public, that it not be about exceptions in the shadows, that it be about fairness and justice and the contributions these people bring to our communities.
It's interesting to hear that part of the story in terms of the case that was made for it, because in business ethics, there's an Illinois Business Immigration Coalition that started here. And so a lot of people in the business community, a wide variety of business owners and corporate leaders will make that exact same case. So even if someone isn't moved to work for change because of a commitment to justice, the business case, the medical case. And Donna and I also have talked a number of times, to your point about these outstanding students. A lot of times we'll find, we don't necessarily know which students are undocumented, but many times they end up being the students who are, stellar in the classroom while also juggling a full-time job and commuting and taking care of family. And so there's a lot of overlap, I think, between what you're describing and what I see in the business community and what Don and I have seen at Dominican.
Right. And Liz, your point is just so important, because so many people who oppose immigration reform believe that immigrants are taking something from them. And they think that there's a limited pie, and if they get some of it, then that's less pie for others. And the answer is actually that immigrants grow the pie, and that we're all in this together.
Right, exactly. Thank you for making that point. Memo. DePaul has, an entire history of working with the immigrant community in Chicago. Could you just tell us a little bit about how immigrants have been essential to the mission of DePaul? You're muted.
Thank you, Liz. Sorry. So DePaul was founded by the Vincentians 125 years ago. And this institution is inspired by Vincent de Paul, a genius of charity and the service of vulnerable communities. I like to tell our students that they are our mission. I am responsible for the mission and ministry of DePaul University with a great group of professionals. And I like to tell our students they are our mission. So we have been committed with these students. And from the beginning, we have migrants and African Americans and Jewish students in the 50s when they were not accepted in other schools. They came to DePaul. Women, when they were not accepted in other schools, they came to DePaul and they became our mission. The students have been transforming our identity and who we are. This is happening with DACA students too. Our commitment with them is related to who we are institutionally. We are an institution that sees in every student and every faculty and staff the dignity that is unquestionable and negotiable and undeniable. That principle is essential for us. And there is another principle that is deeply connected to that one, is that we belong to each other, that our dignity is connected. We are connected to each other in the way we see each other and that we respect the dignity of each other. We are working with our students so that they reflect the kind of society we want to be as an institution.
Thank you for that. Donna, could you talk a little bit about your key learnings from the journey that Dominican has been on in terms of being a sanctuary campus? Because there might be other campuses represented on the call who either are sanctuary campuses or who are considering that.
Sure. Dominican's Board of Trustees approved our sanctuary campus resolution in December of 2016. Obviously that date would be important. And I guess I should say to start that I'm still learning as our sanctuary campus covenant evolves and as it bleeds into everything that's going on with Black Lives Matter and the anti-racism movement. So it's a dynamic experience. But if I had to say three things that I've learned, the first is that this is a circumstance that can't be narrowly defined. You can't support students without understanding the dynamics in their blended families, and you can't support students without understanding their communities, because it's all part of one matrix. You can't just advocate for DACA without really being committed to support constructive immigration reform. And this may sound controversial, you can't just care, you can't just accompany, you have to take a public stand. You have to be public about your support and your advocacy. I also learned, and this surprised many of my colleagues initially, that in the context of what we believe as Catholic universities, it's not nearly as scary as people think to take a stand. As presidents, we worry about public opinion, we worry about philanthropy, we say, what if? You take one stand and donors object. But as it turned out, Dominican's advocacy for undocumented students and ultimately our very public sanctuary campus resolution was really viewed as a missions-driven act of courage, essentially. And even our alums who disagreed politically understood our stand and respected the voice and the moment. And then finally, the third thing that I've really learned over time is I've learned to flip my thinking, to view our dreamers not as vulnerable students who need our charity, but quite the opposite, as talented, capacity building assets for our communities that are in need of equitable opportunity. These are strong, driven, capable students. And so by declaring our sanctuary campus, what we really did was create an umbrella of opportunity and a transparency that was welcoming to our students and galvanizing for our faculty and staff. And ultimately a very important statement, moral statement of mission for the university that has really changed how we do many of the things we do, and surely our visibility in this space, proudly so.
Right, definitely.
Yeah. And the one thing I'd also say, Liz, is that, I've been at this 27 years. So I really do have the privilege of stability in the presidency. And I speak about leadership and resiliency all the time. And there are three characteristics of leadership that really engage over time. One is an alignment of your institutional mission and your personal vocation. You have to believe this work deeply. The second is an unrelenting sense of optimism. I do believe that we are going to see constructive immigration reform. And the third is impact. And our sanctuary campus resolution has been, truthfully, and you've heard me say this, it has been as life-changing for me as it continues to be for the students who learn within our care.
Right, thank you. Those are all really important points. And I do think the element of, Catholic social teaching undergirding all of our institutions is certainly a help in situations where there might be pushback, but I think the conversion that takes place for all of us is really that encounter. Now it might be with undocumented students, but, Memo, as you were saying, with, the different populations who were not served at all by universities in the 50s. So there is always this element of when you encounter the other, it really does make a difference also in one's willingness to take a stand, and then you have the support of the church's teaching. Mark, could you tell us a little bit about what lessons you've learned during the process of opening the doors to the medical school? Because while that sounds like, a fantastic idea and it fits with Catholic social teaching, sort of the nitty gritty of getting it done within an institution, especially if you're at the forefront of being an advocate for that, there are certainly challenges.
Sure, thank you. Three quick lessons. One is that one has to get buy-in from a whole variety of colleagues and other people become advocates for these students, because I can't do all the things myself. I have, I need buy-in from financial aid, from admissions, from student affairs. And so when I started doing this, it was really a two-pronged effort. On the one, there was enormous self-education I undertook because I felt like I couldn't just go to all these other offices with the problem. I needed to go with some ideas of solutions and understand an awful lot about the issue. And I needed to go with just enough that I could sit in their offices and say, now, using your expertise, how do you think we might overcome some of this, and ask them to become part of the solution? And people like to use their expertise. And so trying to make other allies is a very important piece institutionally. You know, because this is, to some degree, I always refer to this as the really new Jim Crow. We have a group of students who can't access a lot of the mainstream systems, and we need people to try to build parallel systems for them. And that's a lot of work. These people, these are busy people. Administrators are overworked typically. And so it's a constant effort to get their buy-in and to keep that buy-in going forward as we hit new obstacles. The other piece, the second piece that goes with that is I don't have the luxury in my institution of the continuity that Dr. Donna was just talking about. What a wonderful thing to have stability and leadership. Most of our institutions have been going through a lot of transitions. I'm on my fourth dean since I started working on the DACA issue, and you know, 2 presidents, 3 provosts, you know, and so with each of these, one of the good things about institutional buy-in, though, is once you know you're known for something, people can't just shut it down, you know, and so that exerts a certain amount of pressure. But the newcomers don't have the same buy-in as something that they built, that they have ownership of, and so there's a constant effort to keep initiating new people and to try to get them to bring their talents to this and not just have it be something that they're okay with, but they aren't really trying to tend the garden with you. And that's a big challenge. And the final thing I'll say is, when it comes to working with the students, and I completely agree that they are ultimately the catalysts and drivers of all of this. They are the prophets who are crying out for justice, and we've heard that cry. We understand what it means to just not be able to turn away from it, and we try to bring that cry to others so that they can hear it too, because we know how powerful it is. But sometimes you will have a potential student in your office for whom you can't see the path forward. You know, some of the barriers just look too big for them. And I will say that at those moments, what I try to remind myself is to still encourage them, that they will find a path. Don't quit. Keep going forward. They've had enough people in their lives telling them that this can't be done, you know, that there's no path for you. And we've seen so many do the impossible. And so until that day we get justice and we stop this separate but equal and bring everybody into one system as citizens, we have to remember to be voices of encouragement on this accompaniment journey.
Right, right. That's definitely very important. And I do think the institutionalization of things is important, because otherwise, if there are only a few people on board at an institution, even if it's someone at the dean or provost level or the president level, but if it's not institutionalized, then when those people move on or retire, then that initiative tends not to continue support. So definitely the institutionalization within any institution, but particularly in higher ed is important. Memo, could you talk about how DePaul in particular has influenced other universities around the US to open doors for DACA recipients?
Well, I am very hesitant to take credit for that. We're influencing other universities nationally. I would say that we decided to be part of a movement, a national movement. We joined others. In Chicago, as you can see, Dominican University, Loyola University, and others have been working so hard. But we decided to take this seriously. One of the essential dimensions of Vincentian spirituality is a constant reading of the signs of the times. In the past 40, 50 years, migration has become a sign of the times. With the globalization process, the migration has grown all around the world. Practically all the borders of the world are right now places of tension and conflict. Without talking about refugees and other victims of what we call today modern slaveries. Today, we are celebrating the International Day against human trafficking. And human trafficking and migration are deeply connected. So is systemically seeing and systemically analyzing reality and the role we have in education to contribute in the transformation of our society. The model of society we have today is not working, and it's not working especially for groups that are in the margins. We are decided to embrace the call and the movement that Pope Francis is creating for us to move to the geographical and existential margins of society, and to embrace those who systemically are excluded, who systemically are neglected in their rights. At DePaul, we are committed with that. It's essential in our mission, and we are doing it supporting DACA students. So we had been transforming. We decided several years ago to transform our processes, to train our staff and our faculty to work with DACA students, to invest dollars in that, to create a scholarship and many other different projects. But essentially, we want to be a part of a national movement. We have been supporting the Pastoral Migratoria, the office of Elena. I was from the beginning with her in the process when she was creating this project to work with migration and educating others. So we are here and we want to be partners. We want to work with others, and we want to do it for the common good, a good that disappears in our imagination, in our collective imagination. We are emphasizing so badly the individual good that we are unable to solve simple problems or make simple decisions as to wear a mask to protect the other who is closer to me. It's unbelievable, but this is the society in which we are. This is the challenge. This is a sign of the times. There is a call. That call is from God, and that call is in our hearts. We want to respond to that.
All right, thank you. And to the point of how to respond, we're going to hear now from Ashley Feasley, who works on policy for the Bishops' Conference. And Ashley's going to talk a little bit about the latest developments in immigration policy and how it affects DACA recipients, some concrete steps and actions that those of us who really feel moved by this issue can take. And also she'll suggest some resources for us.
So thanks so much for having me. And I feel very honored to be able to speak with some of the amazing leaders from the educational field and from the Catholic Church. I wanted to just talk very briefly, as there are a lot of changes that have occurred, frankly, in the last 6 weeks. And so if we can go to the first slide. I wanted to it sounds like we have a very experienced audience, and certainly the panelists are experts, but it's always helpful, I think, to get a little context. I just wanted to start at the beginning, just in case. DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is something that was created by President Obama in 2012 that allowed children who'd been brought here by their parents to remain here in a legal status. It does not provide permanent residency or citizenship. It just allows people to not face the fear of deportation because they're undocumented, and to be able to work legally and go to school legally. At the height of the DACA program, we had about 800,000 young people. Now I'd say we're closer to 690 to 700,000. You may want to know why. Well, there's a number of factors. One is that the program does have pretty rigorous requirements, and sometimes it's hard for people to pay for the program or the renewals. Sometimes they're not able to get all the requirements together to process, and some people have been afraid by what has happened to move forward with the program itself. So I think we're all familiar that the president attempted to end the program in September 2017. And because of litigation, the program was kind of on hold, not allowing new DACA applicants, but allowing existing DACA beneficiaries to continue the program and continue to apply for renewal, which meant they continue to have the opportunity to work legally, go to school legally, and live their lives, most importantly, free from the specter of deportation. In November of 2019, the Supreme Court actually heard the series of cases that were looking at the legality of the program and the way that the program was ended. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail. On June 18th, the Supreme Court decided that the way the Trump administration ended the program was not legal. The opinion at that time was interpreted to allow new DACA applicants to apply. Fast forward to the day immediately after the Supreme Court decision until earlier this week, myself and anybody who basically turns on the news or has Facebook or Twitter heard a series of conflicting announcements about ending DACA or continuing the program from the president and the administration. Well, earlier this week, on the 27th, the Trump administration issued a new memo, which, while it does not cancel the program, it does significantly narrow the program. And I believe it signals an intent to further examine ending the program in the future. So if we could go to the next slide. I think it's important, the Supreme Court decision was somewhat surprising and a welcomed blessing in the sense that it allowed the DACA program to withstand the initial challenge of the president attempting to end the program in 2017. While it's a victory, undoubtedly, it's a temporary victory in the sense that the opinion itself does not address the legality of the DACA program. It just looks at the way that the president tried to end the program in 2017. And so again, the opinion lays out a number of factors that the administration failed to examine and failed to kind of think through thoroughly. And so, we still are in a position where we are waiting to see the administration's move, whether they allow the program to continue as they've been doing or whether they attempt to ultimately end it. We don't know, as I said, the memo is a first step. But one thing that is undoubted is the fact that like President Obama, President Trump is dealing with administrative power, and ultimately, particularly, hearing from advocates here on this important webinar, Congress does need to act to give permanent legislative protection to Dreamers and also give them a path to citizenship. So if we can go to the next slide. So again, what the memo basically says is that current DACA recipients, they're protected in the sense that they don't lose their DACA immediately. But with this memo that came out earlier, their renewal process will be changing. Unfortunately, they will go from having 2 years of work authorization to 1. Which is a big change, and no new DACA applicants, which itself is possibly contradictory to what the Supreme Court opinion called for in its issuance in June. This is going to affect DACA recipients in a number of ways. Obviously, the continued uncertainty weighs on DACA recipients and their families. But also on the practical day-to-day application, it means that DACA recipients will have to pay more for the same amount of time to have legal work authorization. So it is going to be a financial hit for the DACA recipient community and their families in terms of making sure they have the funding. I do want to pivot to what we're looking at in Congress. The House has acted. They've passed the American Dream and Promise Act. And so we are waiting for the Senate and waiting, frankly, for lasting protection that I think it is going to be quite difficult to get. If we could go to the next slide. I wanted to just take a moment. I think Symbol's, story and her discussion of med school is so important. And I think we cannot have any sort of discussion about immigrants and refugees in this moment and not talk about the devastating impacts of COVID-19. There is without a doubt that immigrants and refugees, including DACA recipients, have been negatively impacted by COVID-19 in numerous ways. But I do just want to point out that for DACA recipients, you have a population that is undoubtedly on the front lines of the response. As Symbol's experience, in the medical profession shows, we have DACA recipients who are truly helping our country. So the New American Economy, for example, they estimate that 62,000 DACA eligible individuals are currently working in healthcare. And then the Center for Migration Studies gives a whole listing, and I urge you to look at their work. But the point being, is that we have a population here who are not only in need of protection, but as it was pointed out earlier, are active stakeholders in their own kind of well-being, and in our community and our church and our country's well-being as well. So if we could go to the next slide. So our request of senators here, and again, we're focusing on the Senate because the House has already passed a bill that has a path to citizenship for all Dreamers, is that we're asking them to pass the DREAM Act or introduce and pass the American Dream and Promise Act in the Senate. I'm going to be honest, that's unlikely during this time frame. The Senate has many things on its plate right now. They have not finished the latest piece of COVID-19 relief. They have not finished their appropriations bills. And so it's very unlikely that we're going to see them take up a standalone immigration bill that gives Dreamers a path to citizenship. And this is why we're asking for currently to include protection from deportation of DACA and temporary protected status residents in the Senate's package. I want to be clear, the Catholic Church and the American bishops are not moving away from the call for permanent protection to a path to citizenship or for comprehensive immigration reform. But we are being realistic about the amount of time we have in an election year and the amount of suffering and uncertainty that DACA recipients are experiencing with this constant back and forth about not knowing about their status, their work authorization, and other things that are really impacting their daily lives. And so, you know, I urge you, most of you in the Chicago area have, you know, Senators Duckworth and Senators Durbin, who are wonderful contributors and leaders, but I urge you to, you know, continue to press to make sure that DACA recipients and TPS recipients are included in this package. They were in the House HEROES Act that was passed in May, but we have not seen so far that to be the case with the Senate bill. So if we can go to the next slide. And here's the important part about you and what you can do. I urge you to sign up for the Justice for Immigrants updates. Elena mentioned it. It is a campaign that was created by the US bishops. It is 15 years old this year, and very much moving forward with education, advocacy, and information on Catholic social teaching on migration and programming. Please sign up, and we give a bi-monthly newsletter and all sorts of webinars. We have a number of DACA resources. We are coming live with our one-pager on the memo that I just described in English and Spanish tomorrow. And then I urge you to please, you know, work to consistently engage your Senate offices on this issue. Even if you have a Democrat, there's a ton of requests that are being kind of flooding offices, and we really want to make sure that immigrants and refugees, particularly DACA recipients and TPS recipients, are included. And then also I list the Ignatian Solidarity Network has some great resources, as does the Archdiocese of Chicago, but learn how to support, you know, Dreamers, not just from this advocacy standpoint, but through some of the things that my fellow speakers have mentioned. So I greatly appreciate your time, and I'm happy to participate in any questions there may be.
Thanks, Ashley. One quick question. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but one person has asked if you know if it's the same fee for renewal applications.
So at this time, the memo does not mention that the fees will increase. And so we're assuming that the fees will be the same. However, we are expecting a new fee increase to occur. It's been in process now for, unfortunately, about 18 months. And some of the fee, there could be an increase to the DACA, you know, application and renewal. We are waiting to see.
Okay, thank you. Donna, there's a question here that someone says, when a college campus says they are a sanctuary campus, what does that mean?
I would refer you to our website, and it's that statement is there, and our covenant is there too. It's really a moral statement. It's, you know, if you read our document, we're not suggesting that we're breaking the law, but it's saying to students that in the context of our mission and how we organize our programs and how we create policy, that we're sensitive to the unique situation of undocumented students. As part of it, we have something called a front door policy. So all of our faculty and staff who are first responders understand how to approach requests about our students, how to refer an ICE visit and the like. So we have created a very active, protective shell, but in large part, it is a public commitment that gives our students a sense of welcome and identity. And then policies cascade down from that.
Okay, thank you. Memo, if you could start with this one, but Mark and Donna, you may want to weigh in. Memo, have you had any interactions, or has DePaul worked at all with university administrators who are at non-faith-based institutions? At Catholic institutions, you know, obviously Catholic social teaching and usually the mission of an institution will be really supportive on these types of issues, but have other institutions reached out at all to learn more?
DePaul is Catholic by name. The identity of DePaul is very interfaith and interreligious. And in this interreligious network, there are people with no faith or more humanistic approaches. So I am pretty new at DePaul. In this third time that I come to DePaul is 5 months. So I cannot respond to that question, but what I can say that our approach to this issue and to others is interreligious, multi-faith, and it is multicultural. We believe in something that transcends religion and something that transcends cultures. It's a universal and global value that gives foundation to everything we do and everything we say, and the way we speak to people of faith and people of no faith.
Sure, I'd be happy to say a word or two about that. You know, there are many kinds of colleges and universities. You know, there's private versus public, faith-based versus non-faith-based, and there's categories intermingle, right? There's private universities that are not faith-based. And in my experience, you know, we've been reached out to by a lot of different medical schools and universities, and the state institutions face pressures from their legislatures and governors depending on the particular politics of the places. And so some states will be very forward in leaders, such as the California system, the University of California system. The University of Texas system has more trouble because they have to worry about their appropriations from their legislatures. But when it comes to private universities that are not faith-based, there's a lot of questions about why one should bother. And, you know, I used to do more of the big picture explanation of being on the right side of history, and sort of as Father Memo was saying about the you know, being there for immigrants from previous generations, and then you know, wanting to be on the right side of history, just the same way your university wants to be known for being on the right side of history during the segregation and Jim Crow era, and then different universities have different legacies, without some very embarrassed from their legacy and not wanting to be that way 20 years from now. However, I think lately we've been able to say things much more practical to them about this. Namely, we are having a moment of consciousness in this country about institutional exclusion and racism, and the you know, it's stretched once we we became known for DACA, we became for 1 or 2 years the leading medical school in the country just in terms of sheer number of applications. There were a lot of students who wanted to be at a place that took this kind of stand. I think this is true of undergraduates at many universities now. If you are perceived as being on the progressive side of this kind of issue, many more students will want to come to your institution. It's just that simple. And to be seen as wanting to stay above the fray and be quiet about these things is likely not to be appealing to a lot of students.
You know, I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of different institutions about undocumented students and advocacy. And I usually say two things. Start with, and Mark was alluding to this, start with some real soul searching, understand how pervasive or not your institution's commitment is to this particular issue, so that you enter the conversation at a place where you can make commitments. And some institutions, like the Catholics, can and should lead. Others will have impact at other levels. And the other thing I always say, and again, this does piggyback on what Mark said, is the conversation about equity today is very significant, and we should make sure that the struggles of undocumented students are understood in that context. And if your institution is having that conversation, and by equity, I mean providing students the level of support that they need to be successful, which may differ depending upon different students and different groups of students. For undocumented students, you need to be very clear about the extent to which you as an institution are willing to differentially financially support them. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Liz, I want to just add something in this context of the question about religion. I participated during the 2 years of the discussion of the Global Compact on Migration at the United Nations. And in the many discussions that we have with migrants, all of them were unanimous in one claim. They claim that we all respect their full humanity. And in the discussions, they say that the respect of the dignity of the migrant begins with the recognition of the migrant fully. The ethics of care begins with the ethics of recognition. And the recognition is an essential concept for all religions and all cultures, recognizing the humanity of the other. That's where the place where we are failing in our society. Today, the African American movement, the anti-racist movement, is claiming that they are seen and respected as human beings. And in the Congress, a woman was asking to be respected as a human person to another colleague who was treating her in derogatory terms. We need to see each other in a different way. I think this is a call coming from all peoples who have been neglected their own dignity in the way we see them.
Right, thank you. We have time for one more question before we have a move to a presentation from a DACA student and some announcements. Are any of you familiar with the U.S. Dream Scholarship? And if so, how have you partnered with them, if you have, or what information can you give the audience about that?
Liz, are you talking about the dream.us? Is that the one you're asking? Okay. So the dream.us is the largest scholarship program that supports undocumented students. I actually jumped off the orientation for the 1,100 new dream.us scholars that are starting in 70 different colleges across the country. It is was founded by Don Graham, who's the son of Katharine Graham, who founded the Washington Post. And it provides up to, I think right now it's $26,000 for qualified dreamers over 4 years to help with their tuition. As a partner institution, there are 70 of us, and Dominican was actually the first Illinois institution to do this. You have to commit to assure that all the other support, financial support the students get, is so substantial that their out of pocket is $5,000 or less. So to give you a very transparent example, Dominican has about 200 undocumented students. For every undocumented student, we provide $25,000 a year in scholarship support. Dream.us marries that to 25, 26 over 4 years. They provide a lot of support. They have a very active network. Students are outstanding academically. Last year, I think we had 90 Dream.us scholars had 100% retention.
So just to add, last year when the House of Representatives held a hearing on the American Dream and Promise Act, Bishop Dorsonville was one of the individuals who testified, and he did testify with Don Graham representing Dream.us to talk about the amazing contributions of DACA recipient students, but also of the university system and kind of what was at stake there. And it was very powerful, his engagement and his ability to speak to that issue.
All right, thank you very much to all of the panelists who have spoken so far. That's been very informative, and there are a lot of positive comments in the chat. I have a few announcements to make, and then we're going to have a final presentation by a student who also is a DACA recipient. So there will be a Spanish webinar, and the information is up here on the 13th of August. So the information is there. And if you want to, in addition to the Justice for Immigrants, Network is another organization, and also the Archdiocese of Chicago, the Immigration Ministry. You can sign up for texts and emails. And so when there is legislation that's being proposed, you'll usually get a text the day before or that day, so you can call your representative or senator. And they have all of them have a lot of one-page information just to help you educate yourself. They can also be used in the classroom, and they can be used in parishes. So if you subscribe to the monthly information that Pastoral Migratoria sends out, I'm sure you'll find that informative. Catholic Relief Services also has a CRS University information. Charles Strain from DePaul University and I put together modules to be integrated into the classroom with an ebook, and Megan Clark from St. John's University and I have been working this summer to update the Catholic Relief Services modules that can be used for parish discussions and prayer groups, but also can be integrated into high school and undergraduate classrooms. So there are a lot of resources out there for parishes and for other people looking to integrate discussions and to educate themselves. If you have questions, the CatholicsandImmigrants.org is the Archdiocese of Chicago Immigration Ministry website, and you can reach out to Elena Johan or Raimundo. And they can direct you to someone who can help you with the particular area that you're working in. What we're going to do now is we're going to move to Jacqueline Romero, and she's going to be our final prayer for this session. Jacqueline is a graduate of Dominican University, and she's currently pursuing a master's in Hispanic Theology and Ministry at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. So Jacqueline, if you could share with us your art and your prayer as we finish up this webinar.
Thank you. Okay, it's going up. So I want to start by sharing a brief background on how I came to create this artwork. as a graphic design major at Dominican University, and also at the same time a Catholic Theological Union student studying Hispanic theology and ministry. I was motivated to combine both my passion for art as well as my recent interest in theology and my personal story. So I guess this is a life's work. I was born in Mexico and I was brought to the US when I was 2 years old. I grew up listening to stories of members in my family of when they crossed and other stories of people that they've probably known too. In a way, this piece is a result of my popular religiosity traditions. I specifically chose the Stations of the Cross because of my deep involvement in my church's Via Crucis Viviente tradition in Little Village. I was usually Mary Magdalene, so I had a very dramatic part. For those who are not familiar with the symbolism behind the monarch butterfly, it is often used as a symbol of resilience because of its innate migration patterns. The monarch butterfly is free to fly from the northern reaches of US and Canada, feeding on the milkweed, to then flying back down south to Mexico, escaping the northern cold winters. And it's all because of the survival of their generations, future generations. You can see where that's going, right? The butterfly is like the immigrant crossing the border. It has to survive the journey for their future generations. Each station represents an aspect of the journey in which the migrant crossing the border lives. So you might see some kind of chronological order to it, but not necessarily because they're different aspects of the journey. You will find that the titles of each panel is in Spanglish, and that's because I grew up learning both languages and forgetting most of it for the translations. So I usually find myself speaking in both languages at the same time. I could also not tell my story in just one language. It would not be fair for my mom, my family, and I just couldn't just do it in English. As I go through the stations, join me in this journey with Jesus, fellow undocumented youth, parents, DACA recipients who are currently going through difficult times. And therefore, I would like to ask for you to pray for our government leaders, to be guided by God in the decisions to be made in the name of justice. So here we go. The first station, Jesus is condenado to death. Immigrants are often punished for taking a journey of salvation. The butterfly immigrant is caught in the problems of society and condemnation. The barbed wire symbolizes detention centers, jails, prisons, ankle bracelets, desert camps, inhumane hieleras, which are translation for ice boxes, where immigrants are held. Second station, Jesús carga su cross. The monarch, who is also the immigrant, is painfully tied with a chain to a heavy cross over the border, a cross of many burdens, burdens of violence, poverty, hunger, frustration due to lack of opportunities, and also leaving a family and home behind. Third station, Jesus falls for primera vez. The journey begins by walking through the desert. The immigrant, like Jesus, takes a painful fall on the rough terrain, and a piece of the monarca breaks off. Fourth station. Jesús se encuentra with his mother, la Virgen. The immigrant, especially if from Mexico, has a deep love towards la Virgen de Guadalupe. Our mother is always present. We are loved and accompanied by our mother when we face loneliness, nostalgia, sadness for leaving our homeland. Fifth station, Simón el Cirineo helps Jesus. Through the journey, we find people in our way that lend the immigrant a helping hand. Volunteers of the desert leaving water jugs for immigrants to find, nonprofit organizations fighting for immigrant dignity and human rights, family members that offer their already tight homes for a warm welcome. And God, even through the suffering, never abandons us. The sixth station, La Verónica wipes Jesus' face. Jesus, even while suffering, needs to be cared for. A gesture made with kindness goes a long way. The Veronica symbolizes the allies, los acompañantes, the activists, and the advocates for immigrant rights. 7th station. Jesus falls por segunda vez. Having walked miles and miles through the desert under the hot sun, the migrant physically suffers overwhelming thirst, painful wounds, and extreme heat. We're reminded of Jesus' suffering as the second piece of the monarca also falls off. 8th station. Jesús consuela the women of Jerusalem. While suffering, Jesus finds himself comforting the crying women. The migrant, like Jesus, does what he does because he loves his family, which is why the migrant takes on the suffering. You might hear stories of immigrants crossing the border where their life was saved by a stranger on the very same journey. 9th station. Jesus falls por tercera vez. When immigrants continue the journey through the desert, oftentimes they are found carrying religious objects as sources of strength. Scapulars, like you see here on the left side of the panel. That one is a scapular of Santo Toribio Romo. He is a well-known saint from Jalisco, actually the same place I was born. And there are many stories of his appearance helping migrants, either telling them to go back because it's safer if they go back, or showing them the way, or even giving them jugs of water to keep going through the desert. People also carry rosaries, prayer cards, images of saints and many virgins, like La Virgen de San Juan de los Lagos and many others that people are very closely tied to for strength. 10th station. Jesus is despojado of his clothes. As you can see, the butterfly no longer has the color orange, and that is because Jesus was undressed. The immigrant is often humiliated by authorities, marginalized in society, and forgotten. Immigrants find themselves assimilating to the American culture by having to let go of their traditions, native language, customs, and many ideas. 11th station. Jesus is nailed to la cruz. When Jesus is nailed to the cross, he is suffering alone and naked. Many times, immigrants crossing the border find themselves naked, alone, and lost. 12th station. Jesus muere on the cross. Immigrants die in the workplace, jail cells, in the dry desert, walking down the street, detention centers, and sometimes even gang violence or police brutality as well. If you look closely to this particular image, the color orange is somewhat visible. And I have to be very honest that this was an artistic mistake, but it actually happened to be something beautiful and almost a religious experience, because why I wanted it to symbolize a mourning, black, dark place because Jesus was gone. It also, the orange kind of foreshadowed the life that would come during the resurrection. 13th station. Jesus is bajado from the cross. The butterfly is dismembered like Jesus's body was when it was brought down. Like the Roman soldiers, border patrols stand as bystanders, heartless watchers, and at times instigators. 14th station. Jesus es puesto in his tomb. Throughout the desert, unofficial tombs are marked by crosses made of twigs, rocks, or later when found, a wooden cross, maybe with a name. Sometimes they don't have names because people don't know who they are or where the body, who it belonged to. Immigrant bodies are either found buried, probably by other immigrants on the same journey, or sometimes the opposite. They're found decomposed bodies left behind or lost. The desert has become a holy land because of the blood that has been shed on it, almost like the sacrifice Jesus makes for us in the name of love. In the 15th station, La Resurrección de Jesús. Jesus rises from the dead, the monarca gains its bright orange color back. And for the immigrant, this means that after the painful journey, it was all worth it because their kids or their offspring will have the opportunities to go to college, to have a shot at living the American dream. And dreamers are the American dream, but so are our parents who were the original dreamers. Let's not forget that. And I'd like to say a special thank you to Dominican University for giving me the resources and the space and empowerment to make this piece and also make it so public, because sometimes being undocumented, it's you kind of hold back on being very public about these kinds of things. But I'd like to thank for that space, and thank you to the Archdiocese of Chicago for this amazing panel.
Thank you, Jackie. That is fantastic. Yes, let's give her a round of virtual applause. Thank you to everyone who participated today. There will be a recording of this sent out to everybody who registered, so you can look for that in your inbox soon. Have a wonderful afternoon and God bless.